Welcome to Additional Pylons Games. In this video, I'll be categorizing the Firepower Freelancers of Atlas Reactor, discussing some general guidelines, and outlining a few considerations for when and how to use your ultimate ability to its greatest effect. Keep in mind that this is being recorded during Season 2 of Atlas Reactor. Even though there may be some changes to Freelancers since this video, I'll try to keep the principles overarching and timeless so they'll always be applicable. When you're done with this video, be sure to check out my frontline and support guides, which you can find linked in the description. You can also view my individual freelancer guides, which you'll find in the cards on this video. Whether melee or ranged, stealthy or hard-hitting, every Firepower Freelancer has the same goal: to maximize their damage output against the enemy while receiving as little damage in return. This is the art of damage optimization, which we'll talk about just as soon as we describe the general categories of Firepower Freelancers. As we begin, keep in mind that the categories I offer are not static. Freelancers will shift between certain categories based on mods, playstyle, and any changes to their kit made for balancing purposes. These positions are simply where the freelancer begins by default, and each player can push them one way or the other, depending on how they customize the character. There are three basic types of Firepower Freelancers at this time. They generally fall into the triangle of mobile, stealth, and tanky, with a few characters that fall more centrally on the triangle. Most freelancers are a mix of two types, but there are some very heavily steered into one area. Mobile Firepower Freelancers are characterized by movement and dashing abilities, and making the most of being able to slip away from sticky situations effectively. Oz, Lockwood, and Kagan are heavily mobile characters, with Blackburn and L slightly into this category. Stealth characters make use of their ability to sneak around the map, striking from the shadows before skulking back to strike when the opportunity arises again. Gray and Nyx fall heavily into this category, with Pup and Celeste also here, but more central on the triangle. Pup is a good central mix of stealth, tank, and mobile, and Celeste is a mobile, stealth firepower character. Kagan can also be quite stealthy, depending on the playstyle and mods, but I think he starts more in the mobile category. Even though they have no stealth abilities, Gremolitions Inc. fits here because they benefit from a long-range, stealthy playstyle. The last style are tanky characters. These are more rare, but there are some Firepower Freelancers who are designed to be stand and fight, never back down, high damage output characters. The quintessential tanky Firepower Freelancer is Juna, who's designed to be a human turret holding her ground as much as possible. I've also placed Zuki here, but she really is pretty borderline between tanky and mobile, and admittedly, she's the hardest character to categorize on the triangle. Along with the types of firepower characters, we also have a spectrum of what the freelancers emphasize: pure damage or utility. Again, characters can shift from one category to another, but these are general starting points. Pure damage characters are those with the greatest focus on simply harming opponents. No messing around with slowing, weakening, and so on. Just kill them. Zuki, Blackburn, Gremolitions Inc., Nyx, L, Oz, and Kagan all fall into this category to varying degrees. I've arranged the various pure damage characters based on how far I believe they fit into this category by default. Again, these are starting, not absolute positions, based on the overall abilities and the default mods each freelancer comes with. Utility characters provide some sort of additional benefit to the team alongside their damage output. This includes the vision provided by Gray, the traps from Celeste and Lockwood, which control areas and positioning, the silence and leashing abilities from Pup, and the knockback and area control of Juna. Utility comes from in a number of forms, and there are some utility abilities on the more pure damage characters. Also, don't mistake my ranking of utility to mean these characters aren't as good. At the time of this recording, Gray, who is arguably the most utility-heavy firepower character, is one of the best firepower freelancers. In fact, I believe this is partly due to the excellent utility she provides in revealing opponents, tracking enemies, and trapping them in her ultimate. In the right hands, utility Firepower Freelancers can be just as effective at killing enemies by weakening, slowing, and revealing opponents, and giving your allies more chances to deal damage. So now we can see how each Firepower Freelancer ranks in regards to their type and damage, or utility score. Use this base knowledge to plan out team compositions and create effective strategy. Knowing the strengths and shortcomings of the Firepower Freelancer you choose is the first step to successful damage dealing. The other important aspect of knowing your Firepower Freelancer is knowing facts like range on your attacks and how far you can dash or teleport, and the general flow of how you use your abilities in order to maximize cooldowns. All of these lend toward the important topic of dealing damage through the art of optimal firing. Optimal firing, or optimal damage, is a simple ratio: the amount of damage you deal divided by the amount of damage you receive. The higher you can force this ratio, the better you'll be. Many games simplify this down to a player's kill-death ratio, but in Atlas Reactor, we need to go a bit deeper than that. You might not get the kill, but if you can force the other team's frontliner to stop advancing, or if you can get their firepower character under 25% health, you've crippled the enemy team. That freelancer will spend the next few turns healing, running, and trying to survive, rather than trying to win. High damage out and low damage in means you can create situations where your team is essentially on a power play, facing a 3-person team rather than a full squad. So the goal is to deal the most damage while receiving the least in return. How do we accomplish this? Through a few simple principles. Principle number 1, don't get greedy. This is the standard principle across all MOBA games, so it also applies here in Atlas Reactor. Overextending is one of the worst plays you can make, as you put yourself in a position to be eliminated without necessarily guaranteeing a kill in return. At times, calculated risks are necessary in order to win. Intelligent and team-supported diving is very different from springing your dash into 3 enemies while you're under half health. When you plan to dive, inform your team, get their help, and make a concerted effort to pressure the enemy. No suicide missions. Principle number 2 is to simply know your range and your opponent's ranges. There's nothing worse than the feeling of being 1 square away from landing a killing blow, or knowing that you were killed by the very tip of the opponent's attack. Knowing how far they can shoot with their base attacks and checking their mods is essential. Test your own mods and range to know them like the back of your hand so you can correctly position yourself for striking. Speaking of which, principle number 3 is positioning and movement. Obviously, this applies to any freelancer on the field, but as arguably the most fragile characters, Firepower Freelancers need to be even more conscientious of how and where they're moving. Use cover and walls to mitigate damage, use stealth to avoid detection, and maneuver around the enemy's line of sight to keep them guessing. Half the battle for optimal damage output is placing yourself in a position to attack effectively. Principle 4 is math. Yes, you heard me, math. That subject you hated in school? Turns out it's pretty handy when it comes to Atlas Reactor. As a Firepower Freelancer, you need to be able to make quick calculations on the fly. How much damage can you do? How much can you do over 2 turns? Is that enough to kill? Is it better to use your basic attack or use another ability? If you use that other ability, how long until the cooldown is back up? Can you survive without that ability available to you? What if you have help from your frontliner or a buff from your support? How much damage are you likely to receive if you move in that direction? Firepower Freelancers need to be able to quickly make accurate mathematical calculations to determine what ability to use in each situation. Principle 5 is stretching. This is an extension of the previous principle. On top of being able to make quick and accurate judgments based on damage, Firepower characters need to be able to calculate and determine the best time to use any buffs to stretch their damage potential. For anyone who's familiar with Hearthstone, this principle is also seen there. Good Hearthstone players know when to use a spell or a minion that quickly flips the board, eliminates your opponent's minions, or even buffs your own damage through weapons. The same idea works in Atlas Reactor. As the primary damage dealers in Atlas Reactor, Firepower Freelancers need to know when the proper time is to use their buffing abilities, power-ups from the map, or a buff from a teammate to stretch their damage potential. L's self-buff ability is the perfect example. The buff requires a full turn to set up. Good Firepower Freelancers need to be able to plan ahead and use the buff the turn before, setting up a good shot on multiple enemies. Knowing when and how to stretch damage and maximize its effect is an essential skill for optimal firing and damage. Principle 6 is catalyst usage. In the same way that you need to learn proper timing on buffs and pickups, Firepower Freelancers need to be especially good at timing their catalysts. Again, this is a result of Firepower Freelancers often having the smallest health pools. Proper catalyst usage is vital to maximizing your damage output while reducing your damage received. Generally, I encourage players to wait on using their catalysts as much as possible. When the end of the game comes around and you still have your dash and your blink catalyst, you've practically guaranteed that you can survive for at least 2 turns, which is often enough to win the game, or at least long enough for your team to recover and help you out of a tight spot. However, it's not always that simple. For example, if you use Turtle Tech, you need to make a judgment. Is it better for me to take the damage this turn in order to preserve having this catalyst, or is it better to use it now? Are my allies healthy, or are they hurting too? Again, math is your friend here, as you need to be able to make accurate calculations on how much damage you can or cannot take, and how to act accordingly. Principle 7 is prediction. This has been present in a few other principles, but overall, you need to be able to predict enemy movements, actions, attacks, and catalysts. This again requires a good degree of math, but also insight into what the enemy player has been doing, what abilities they have left, what mods they're using, and what they would be concerned with or see as a good opportunity. This goes a step further when you begin to make predictions 2 or 3 turns in advance, plotting out how you believe the match will go. This is how you begin to approach Atlas Reactor less like a video game and more like a complex match of digital chess. Chess players become masters by observing, creating, and recalling common game setups from the sheer number of games that they play. They review the actions by their opponents, then take the appropriate countermeasures. Firepower Freelancers, as the offensive arm of an Atlas Reactor squad, need to have those same predictive skills to lower the damage they receive, either through avoidance or mitigation, and increase the damage they deliver through both well-timed buffs and optimal firing positions to hit multiple enemies. Finally, we need to talk about using ultimate abilities to greatest effect. Up to this point, all ultimate abilities of Firepower Freelancers are designed to deal massive damage in an area. How massive that damage is, and the shape of that area, varies by Freelancer and mods, but it's true nonetheless. This is a pretty obvious statement, that Firepower ultimates deal damage, but don't lose sight of the other implications of this. Also, keep in mind that some support characters and some frontline characters have damage dealing ultimate abilities, but there are no Firepower characters that have support abilities or tanking abilities as their ultimates. Here are 5 considerations to keep in mind when using ultimate abilities of Firepower Freelancers. First, there is no principle more important than my simple mantra: always ult before you ult. If a clearly vulnerable target has both a dash ability and their blink still available, you can bet that they're going to use one or the other to get away from a compromising position. Before committing to using your ultimate ability, hold down Alt to check the cooldowns on your target. If your target has used their blink catalyst and has no available dash abilities, then ultimate away. If not, then consider another target. Keeping track of your opponent's cooldowns and catalysts is the #1 factor to ensuring that your ultimate ability actually deals the damage you intend for it to do. Don't be that guy that uses Kagan's ultimate ability and teleports into the open middle of the map, only to miss because the vulnerable target used their blink. Second principle, if you're able, consider trying to use your ultimate prior to turn 10. Doing so opens up the possibility of being able to build up energy for a second ultimate. Putting a time limit on when you can use your first ultimate means it might not be the show-stopping, unbelievable triple kill you're hoping for, but many times, 2 mediocre ultimates are more impactful to the outcome of the game than one good one. There are certainly times to save your ultimate for one good use, particularly if you predict that the game won't last all the way to turn 20. But again, 2 ultimates that damage 4 people is statistically better than 1 ultimate that damages 3. Use judgment, but a turn 8 ultimate is a great way to turn the battle in your favor. The third consideration is how you can maximize damage. If you wait a turn and get a might buff, or if you think you can get another opponent into your ultimate's area of effect by moving to another position, consider holding off on your ultimate. This is an extension of the optimal firing principle we talked about earlier. Instead of a 2-target ultimate this turn and a buffed 1-target attack next turn, patience could open the door for a 3-target buffed ultimate next turn. Obviously, this consideration towards patience can sometimes conflict with the previous point of using your ultimate before turn 10. These considerations are all things you need to weigh as you plan out your attacks and your turns. Sometimes patience wins out, and other times it's urgency and the prospect of another ultimate. It's a judgment call, one that you'll have to learn to make for yourself based on your playstyle, character, mods, teammates, and the flow of the game. The fourth consideration is how you can use your ultimate ability to not only kill enemies, but also to cripple them as much as possible. In Deathmatch, the obvious goal is to kill as many opponents as quickly as possible. However, as I've stated in other ways, sometimes a crippled enemy is more harmful to the other team than a dead one. Enemy frontliners may shift decisions in order to protect a heavily injured teammate. Enemy supports will often prioritize healing their teammates who are on death's door. Teams with injured players often mentally shift away from winning or attacking into simply surviving, changing from playing to win to playing to not lose. I'm not advocating to not kill your opponents, but keep in mind that there is strategic value in putting enemy players into a survival-first mindset rather than a winning mindset. The final consideration is how you can use your ultimate for positioning purposes. Positioning is incredibly important in Atlas Reactor, and many Firepower Freelancers have abilities that allow them to either improve their own positioning or impede an opponent's positioning and movement. I'll give an example of each of these. Lockwood, Oz, and Kagan all have abilities which allow them to move around the field. When using their ultimates, consider not only the damage you can cause, but also how you can put yourself into a good position to attack and defend the next round. Land on a buff or behind cover if you're able. On the flip side, Gray and Juna have ultimate abilities that can impact enemy movement. Caging enemies with Gray roots them for the next turn and gives vision of them. Juno's laser punishes enemies who travel through it, which you can use to cut off escape routes. When using your ultimate, don't just think about this turn. Think about how you can also put yourself in a great position to damage enemies next turn, and how you can put them in positions to be damaged. That's a brief primer on how to play as a Firepower Freelancer in Atlas Reactor. As you look for your perfect Freelancer and mod kit, keep these principles in mind so you can maximize your damage output and minimize your damage received. Be sure to subscribe for more Atlas Reactor information, and check out my videos on frontline and support freelancers, as well as my freelancer guides for each individual character. Thanks for watching, and have fun doing math as a Firepower Freelancer. Thanks for watching Additional Pylons Games. Click one of the boxes to watch another video, and click the circle to subscribe and join the APG Zealots. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share it with your friends. Comment below and I'll see you next time here on Additional Pylons Games.